Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce Justin, who will be doing the presentation tonight. So Justin Harmeson is a native of Fountain County. He started as an intern with NICHES in the summer of 2017. And after graduating from Wabash College with a degree in biology, he joined the NICHES staff in May of 2018 as a land steward. And he currently oversees NICHES hunting program. So with that, Justin, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie, for the introduction. I'm just going to preface this by saying this is my first presentation since college, so it's probably going to be a little rusty. Usually I'm kind of out in the field giving presentations, so not this formal something. So I don't really want to keep it formal. If you guys have questions, we're going to have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions, but if I'm moving through this presentation and you have anything, please, again, feel free to hit up Julie in the chat. So as Julie mentioned, I'm the land steward with NICHES. What we do on the land is essentially protecting, restoring, and maintaining natural ecosystems here within West Central Indiana. And my job revolves around removing invasive species, implementing prescribed fires, and really just like taking a holistic approach to protect these lands. My introduction on getting into kind of what I love about nature actually started and stemmed from hunting at a super young age. So taking my love of nature that grew from hunting and then being able to then find a job within this field has been super instrumental. And now being able to run a hunting program is also very gratifying. So I get a lot of the approaches from hunters and questions from hunters, and I can actually take the knowledge that I have gained over the years and kind of look at it from a hunter's perspective. And we'll kind of address some of those in this talk. So, there we go. What is a hunting program? The hunting program is essentially a targeted approach to reduce the population of a desired species. And that's kind of established through a number of different metrics developed by scientific research and anecdotal observations. Hunting essentially for NICHES just revolves around whitetail deer because that is what we're wanting to reduce within these ecosystems because their numbers have gotten to a larger degree than they historically would have been, and they're kind of affecting these plant communities that we're trying to restore and protect. So, but hunting program doesn't have to be just whitetail deer. That's just what we focus on, and that's what this presentation will be about. All right, so whitetail deer in Indiana, they've had a lot of different ebbs and flows. Historically, Native Americans, this would have been a very big food source for them, and by their presence within their last 10,000 years, they were able to kind of create this balance within the ecosystems as settlers kind of progressed in these lands and really started shifting these habitats with, changing to an agricultural setting, a lack of regulations for hunting in place, and then just a general expansion of settlement really allowed the deer to become extirpated within Indiana. So the last reported wild deer was actually killed in 1893. So restoration efforts were available in 1934 through the Pittman and Robertson Act, and that allowed deer to be reintroduced within the landscape. At that point, it was only like 294 deer, which is a super small number compared to our deer herd at this point. So the deer at that point, when they were reintroduced, the landscape had been changed drastically to become more of an agricultural setting. And this actually allowed deer to flourish because they are more of an edge species and like those edges. Historically, that would have been the edge between a prairie and the savanna into an oak woodland. Nowadays, that edge is an agricultural field into an oak woodland. So with the abundance of food available and kind of just what is available, it's allowed the deer herd to really increase in numbers that historically would not have been there. So in 1951, as those increases in deer herd started, becoming a problem, which were actually realized as early as 1948. They implemented a deer season, the first modern hunting season as we've seen it. And that occurred in 17 counties, and it was actually only a 3-day deer season. Alrighty. So those from the first 294 deer that were reintroduced, we've actually, as of 2010, which is the highest numbers in Indiana since then, was we've seen harvests up to 134,000 deer. So again, that's a huge increase in the deer herd since then. The purpose for hunting, so why does NICHES hunt? Deer are a keystone species now that they do not have natural predators. Historically, there would have been mountain lions, wolves, and bears even within Indiana. Along with Native Americans, that would have been keeping the deer population within check. So as those have been eliminated from human and European expansion, deer don't have really any predators besides coyotes, and even coyotes don't have a big presence on deer numbers, which is a pretty common myth within the hunting community. They really don't kind of affect the deer to the extent that that's been perpetuated. So being a keystone species, what is a keystone species? It's essentially a species that kind of disproportionately has a large effect on its natural environment relative to its abundance. For example, humans are a big keystone species. We've drastically changed the landscape for our liking, and that kind of, they're just species that really regulate their environment. So, and what that does then, or why they're kind of considered a keystone species, is because they would have been more of a generalist, where deer kind of eat anything, but they do prefer certain forage, and they will continue to forage on a specific species until it becomes rare before they then go to a less desirable species. And what that does then, that you're affecting the plants within the community. So if a deer is, for example, eating orchids, which they do prefer, orchids have now become more and more rare because they continue to browse on that before then they move on to a different species. And this is pretty evident within forests today as you move in and understand the plants that are around you. For example, I've been in a number of properties that aren't hunted that have really large populations of spicebush and pawpaws, and actually looking at those species. So for example, bud, I know you mentioned marigold. Marigold is a property that isn't hunted and has really large pawpaw stands, and that is typical because deer don't prefer pawpaws, so they'll move on to other species, eat those first, and then that allows the pawpaws to continue to get larger. So, and that leads to other cascades as well. I mean, we have, if pawpaws are increasing in numbers and there's other species that do like it, they'll increase in numbers. So these cascades affect not only the plant community, but other fauna within the ecosystem. And this overall declines the health of our ecosystem. A general metric is that we want really diverse forests, prairies, and savannas around Indiana. And diversity is essentially the number of different plants. So as you decrease the number of different plants, that is also correlated to a decrease in the health of the ecosystem. So deer are affecting the overall diversity within these ecosystems. And a big example of this, and not only deer, but just invasive species and other kind of human effects like habitat fragmentation, are also leading to declines in the overall health of an ecosystem. So not only deer, but deer don't help with these issues as well. There actually have been big proponents of moving invasive species around. For example, garlic mustard, you can actually see that pretty clearly on paths. The deer trails, there's just garlic mustard lining either end of the trail. So they actually don't, or they move the seed, but then they also don't prefer eating these invasive species, so then that just allows them to propagate further. And we want to preserve the species diversity. Alrighty, so overpopulation. Again, that's just evident of what where these species can get to. We want the typical carrying capacity of a species, and that is just where it fits within the ecosystem and can be healthy without harming other species. And deer at this point are well over the carrying capacity that they historically would have been. The metric that we found to be that carrying capacity of deer is roughly 20 deer per square mile. For example, and we'll kind of look at this later on in the presentation, when NICHES first started hunting, the data that we found were that we're roughly at 47 deer per square mile, so way too many. And that has obvious effects on the plant community. Historically, Native Americans would have been taking actually a lot of deer out of the landscape. I mean, a tribe would have been killing 40 to 50 deer per year. However, because of these other problems with the ecosystem, such as the habitat fragmentation and invasive species, deer just don't have areas to kind of get away anymore. They would have been able to kind of move out of the setting of where the Native Americans would have been and been able to kind of withstand their population. But anymore, that's just not an option. So how we get down to 20 deer per square mile and kind of what we want for the carrying capacity is predominantly taking out or harvesting does. If we only harvest bucks, that doesn't really affect the general population of the species. So we will be, and I'll talk about this a little further on too, but what we really want from hunters is to harvest does to really kind of put a dent in the deer population. So this picture is kind of, again, showing that dinner or the behavior of deer and how they will really forage on specific species before they move on to something else. The picture on the left does not have those nice pretty white flowers that the ones on the right have, and that is trillium. Deer really do prefer eating trillium. So the picture on the right was actually an exclosure that was done by, I think it was the University of Pennsylvania. And then that kind of leads me then to the history of NICHES hunting program. So it began in 2010 when one of our founding members, George Parker, was doing research through Purdue and helping work on the state's first hunting programs on DNR lands in state parks. And George was coming up with that research and looking at the overall deer populations and what they were doing to those plant communities. And then he brought that information that he was working with on the state parks to NICHES board at the time. And the board kind of told him, well, let's get some research for us, and then we'll look at, implementing a hunting program. Because at that time, it wasn't such a public normal. It wasn't normal in the public to do wide-scale hunting, and they were expecting some backlash, so they needed some hard evidence to look at. And so George went down to our Weiler-Leopold property, which at the time had a newer restoration down in the bottomlands, where they planted some oaks and other trees, and didn't cage them or anything like that. And George took pictures and highlighted like the huge browse that deer were just chomping down every tree down to the nub, and brought that back to the board, and they kind of understood that that was a problem because, these restorations aren't cheap, and if you're going to then eat thousands of dollars of what we're putting into that, that's a pretty difficult thing to swallow. So after coming back with that information and highlighting how important this is, we started with just the Weiler-Leopold property and hunted that, and found that we didn't really have any problems. We did have, some public outcry, and rightfully so, because you want to question kind of what people are doing. But we found after sharing why we do this, people really kind of understood and realized that that is an important stewardship goal for what we do. So currently now we hunt 29 properties across 2,320 acres. And I think we're up to 120 hunters now, whereas we started with 10 hunters. And so that's, a huge increase in capacity of what we're doing. And we found success in how we've been implementing these hunting programs. So that first year, we're over 40 deer per square mile, and that number drastically decreased. We got it down to roughly 23 deer per square mile. I think it's in the data sheet at the end of this presentation, but I think 23 deer per square mile. And then at this year, I think I calculated it did increase up to 32 deer per square mile of where we're at. But again, it's trending down to where we want to get closer to that carrying capacity to keep the deer healthy and to allow, that species diversity to come back and to maintain these plant communities. So how do we go about implementing a hunting program? And I know this is probably where a lot of you guys on this call want to see. So how we went about it, again, kind of like what George did. He went and first off, you need to understand the properties. So certain properties make sense to hunt. Some of them have restrictions that when they're donated to us, the donors didn't really want hunting to be on the land. Some of them, just where they lie, there's not a way to have it hunted to where you're not going to have issues with the neighbors, or maybe there's too many neighbors and you don't feel safe about hunting. So we need to understand what properties make sense to include in that and what properties are going to have the most effect. So after kind of figuring out what properties we want to hunt, we then engage with local neighbors. That having local neighbors that are on board for what we do, not only as a hunting program, but as niches as a whole for our prescribed fire, is really a big aspect of what we want to do. So we engage with those people and let them know kind of what we're doing and if they want to be involved. So after getting, that engagement, we've really have kind of seen some gratifying results back from them. Usually we reach out to those neighbors first and see if they want to hunt them, the properties, and we'll kind of discuss how we allow hunters to come onto our program. But we want those people that are going to, again, take does, be ethical, that will actually hunt. Some people don't hunt as much as what they probably should be. And we want to ensure that hunter knowledge, that they know what our mission as an organization is, and that they align themselves with that and will actually kind of fulfill those results. So then after we get our hunters on board, we want to make the public aware. So this is one tool here that we're doing with the Zoom presentation. We engage via social media that people know our properties are going to be closed for the month of November. We put up signs every 500 feet on those closed properties to let people know that that property is closed and that they shouldn't be walking on them. And then, we just have that general education around the topic that this is why we're doing a hunting program.
All right. Justin, we have a couple of questions popping up. I figured we'd get some about this time. So some people wanted to understand how hunters are paired with a property. So I know you touched a little bit on the neighbors, but really kind of going into how people are assigned hunting a specific property. And then also how many hunters, some people have indicated they've called in trying to get on our hunting program and have been communicated that our slots are full. So just sharing how we fill those hunting spots.
Yeah, for sure. And Rod Williams actually is going to be joining us here after this slide, and he can kind of touch upon being a point person for a property. So what my role then as the director of the whole program is, I want to have, with 120 hunters, I want to have the least amount of engagement with every hunter. So we usually assign point people for each property, and then properties are hunted to the level roughly that we want a hunter for every 20 acres that we hunt. That keeps, people from stepping on each other's toes, and we found still is a good level to get deer harvested. So depending on the size of the property, again, we will have a point person. Sometimes we hunt properties that are so small that I just interact with one person. But the thing that I typically tell people, and I did have, I think, roughly 20 emails come in this year asking how to get on board. The thing that I tell people is just become involved with the organization. We don't have very many properties come up each year that are new, that are going to be hunted. I think this year we had 4 properties come up that were 4 or 5 that were new. And at that point, we had a backlog of people already that were interested in joining the program. But again, just being involved with the organization and kind of understanding their mission statement, and that just puts you at the top of the list to join. But
Justin, you mentioned point people. You want to talk a little bit how those individuals are chosen and usually paired with a property, how those people are found?
For sure. Again, so the big thing that we as an organization like is that local neighbor engagement. So these typically, most people and most hunters are actually either direct neighbors to our properties or within a relatively close drive to the properties that they hunt. And that kind of gives people overall responsibility of that land, and they kind of take ownership. Along with us as a steward, they take ownership, so that just gets them more involved with what we do. Those people usually are then kind of engaged, as in I'm reaching out to them to see if they're interested in what we do. But also these are people that reach out to us. So I don't want to tell people you can't become a hunter on one of the properties because you don't live within a 2-minute drive. That's not what I'm saying, because there are slots sometimes that open up. But essentially just kind of being there and being involved is really what I would stress.
You want to share some of the usual annual activities that the hunters, the stewardship activities that they provide on the properties that they hunt?
For sure. So Rod, I'm sure we'll talk on this too, but we usually have 2 work days. I roughly want to say that hunters kind of usually donate 15 to 20 volunteer hours of their time each year. And that's a rough metric that I would put on the low end of the amount of hunter volunteers that we have, or volunteer hours that we have. So that's a big thing is they usually put in volunteer hours for that specific property that they hunt. And again, that just gives them further ownership of the land. So then after and we continue this discussion with Rod, but that consistent communication then with these point people and with the overall public is a really big thing, because I want to make sure that I'm checking in with everybody to see how their hunting season is going, to make sure that they're not having any problems with anybody with the public or with any neighbors, because we want to have people that are super big advocates for the work that we're doing on the land and making sure that they're relaying correct and accurate information to the right people. So with that, actually, since I've already mentioned his name a lot, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rod here, and we can get him unmuted and on video. There we go. Hey, Rod.
Hi, Justin.
Rod is our point person at our Weiler-Leopold and Black Rock Barrens property. And again, that was the first property we hunted back in 2010. So maybe he can give a little intro to how he got started with George, and kind of over our overall mission being a point person.
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Rod Williams. I'm an extension wildlife specialist and wildlife professor at Purdue University in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And as Justin sort of alluded to, I'm actually one of those first 10 hunters that started in the Weiler-Leopold hunt back in 2010. And George invited me to be part of that hunt because I'd been involved with some other Purdue University deer reduction hunts as well. And so that procedure and process that he was trying to implement, again, emulating what he was doing in the Indiana State Parks with the NICHES property, I'd already be involved in that and several properties that Purdue had owned. And so I remember, Justin's talked about how whitetail deer are keystone species and the impact that they can have on the habitat. I distinctly remember going to Weiler-Leopold in 2009, right before the hunt started, and George and I were on one of the ridges there looking out over that big field, which is now full of half mature trees. And we were looking at oak trees that were about chest or waist high, and we estimated those to be about 15 years old because of the heavy browse pressure that the whitetail deer have been putting on those trees. You go to that same ridge now, and those trees are as big as your thigh, right? So they've effectively been released because we've decreased those deer densities so that those trees can escape that heavy browse pressure and start to mature. Now that habitat looks incredibly different now compared to when I started hunting there in 2010. You could almost see across that big, huge field all the way to the Wabash River. You certainly cannot do that now, okay? So I think, it's been successful for sure. I mean, if you've been to those properties and you look under the understory, you actually see understory now, whereas 10 years ago, you didn't. So my role as the point person, as Justin's talked about, is really serving as a vehicle for communication between the hunters on the property and NICHES staff. So I communicate both with Justin and Bob Easter, very regular throughout the year. And I also coordinate hunt meetings because safety is absolutely paramount, not only for NICHES, but every one of the hunters that are hunting the property too. So we have scheduled hunt meetings where we talk about safety. We really, really stress the goals of the hunt, which is deer decreasing the doe numbers and decreasing the deer densities, again, to relieve that browse pressure that the properties are seeing. And then, of course, I do all the reporting. So I calculate and tabulate all the deer harvested for our particular hunters in any given year and maintain that database and submit that to Justin and Bob as well. And we also try to coordinate with Justin, as he mentioned, our volunteer days. And those volunteers days, I don't know, Justin, maybe you want to talk a little bit more about it, but there's lots of opportunities to volunteer. So it's not just, I've had hunters on our property volunteer to, there's been people that went and actually dumped trash on the NICHES property, and we went and picked all that up and cleaned that up. We've picked up trash from the roadside. We've obviously done invasive species removal. We tried to last year, but we didn't get it done. Working on some of the signs, we've installed those boot cleaners to help minimize invasive species transfer. So we've done lots and lots of things, and there's lots of ways to get involved and donate back and give back to NICHES. But I don't know, Justin, if there's other ways that people can get engaged and involved with NICHES in terms of volunteer capacity.
Yeah, on our website, if you can sign up for our newsletter, usually we have 2 to 3 work days every month that are volunteer opportunities for people. And I tell hunters that those opportunities exist, but then if we have something specific that we want to see accomplished, that we know a lot of hands could be of use, then usually we will reach out to those hunters on that specific property. I know we had your crew working over on Wally's Lane doing invasive last year, and that was, having 5 brush cutters running, 5 people treating and stacking, it makes a big dent in kind of what we're doing. We only have 2 people on staff for managing over 3,500 acres.
And we also, during our hunter meeting, we have sort of debriefings on how to interact with the public, because it's not uncommon for people just like that are blowing up the chat right now, wanting to know, how they can get involved with NICHES, how they can oftentimes get involved with the hunts. So we want to make sure that our messaging is consistent with those. And we always just tell them, same thing you told them already, get involved, volunteer, become a friend to NICHES, and oftentimes make yourself known. And that's what helps create a position for yourself into the future. So that's the number one question I get asked is, one is, how do I get in? And then once I get in, how long do I get to stay in? Well, how long you get to stay in is somewhat contingent on how you perform on those NICHES properties. Are you being a good steward to the program? So what I look for in a hunter and what allows the hunters to stay in the system is, one is that they have or will initiate and maintain that positive relationship with NICHES, right? Through all the volunteer activities, through the hunting. And not only do they have an understanding, but an appreciation of the goals of that deer reduction, right? So it's not just access to a really beautiful property that may have big bucks like you see in the picture on your screen, right? Those are great to see and perhaps harvest, but that's not why we're there. So not only that they have an understanding, but an appreciation and respect for why we're there to harvest those first and foremost. And of course, they have to be good communicators, because as you mentioned, if we have a hunter on every 20 acres and it's a 200-acre property, we have 10 people hunting in there, which is not that problematic or an area of concern for archery. But during firearm season, these hunters need to communicate. And so as part of the hunt meeting, we share where our stand locations are going to be through some GIS mapping, so everybody knows where everybody's setting. Everyone has everyone's cell phone number, and we have some gentlemen's agreements that, you know, if you harvest a deer and it's not too hot, leave that animal in the field until 10 o'clock, especially if it runs into someone else's area. Text those people, hey, Justin, I shot a doe. I'm gonna wait till 10 to get down, but she ran in your area. Would you mind helping me track her? But I don't want to disturb your hunt as well. So the hunters themselves had to be good communicators, not only with me and NICHES, but with their fellow hunters. And then, as you said before too, they have to be safe and ethical hunters, right? And so once you find yourself having a great relationship with NICHES and you become part of the program, those are the things you need to think about to continue to be part of that program.
Yeah, and that's, we do have some turnover from year to year just because people aren't, following what Rod's mentioned there. That's not been fairly common recently. We've been able to put some great people into some great lands, and they've been doing a really good job of our mission statement. So once, like Rod alluded to, once you get into a property and you're following those rules, we don't like a lot of turnover. I don't want to be having to find, new people every year. That just adds more stress to my job. And, it, again, gives people ownership of that land. And we've really found that they give back even further than what other people do. So, well, thank you so much, Rod. He's going to be here to answer any other questions too as we continue on. But
all right. Well, before we move on, there's some stuff happening in the chat box. I just want to make sure I highlight. So we had a question about how do you find out about volunteering. So if you missed it, I did share in the chat box a link to our volunteer form that you can fill out. That'll put you on the e-newsletter list that Justin kind of alluded to that has volunteer opportunities in it. It also puts you on the list of individuals that will be reached out to when special projects come up as well. We had someone ask about if we meant that volunteer hours were above and beyond the hunting hours. That is correct. We do mean that the hunters would volunteer above and beyond the time that they're hunting. And for those of you who don't know Gus Nyberg, our executive director, he's been putting some information in the chat box as well. And so he shared that we could possibly have 6 to 7 new spots annually open up as we add anywhere from 125 to 150 acres of new land every year. So there are opportunities. Scrolling down, Gus also mentions that we have hunters who help take care of trails, invasive species, cleaning up the roadsides, parking areas, etc. As Rod mentioned, we occasionally have people who dump on our properties, which is really frustrating, but our hunters often come to our rescue and make light of big projects like that quickly.
Just for reference of these photos, for example, the Larimores in the top photo, you see with really large deer, we actually maintain our Berkshire Tarnowski property. So they're mowing it every 4 to 6 weeks just to keep our trails available. And then Ross was also very instrumental in helping us put a bridge on the property. So he donated some stone, and those were just huge assets to me, considering I had a lot of other projects going on, and he kind of took ownership of that property, and you can see he found some success. So
yeah, just 2 more things I'm going to mention before I let you kind of take back over, Justin. Gus did mention that we have parted ways with hunters in the past who haven't followed the rules or who have trespassed on neighbors' properties, etc. And then I had somebody ask if there were ATVs or vehicles allowed to recover harvest. So I'll let you cover that question in just a minute. And just one final point from Gus, that the goal of the hunting program is to reduce the herd. So we do allow people to use ATVs. Oh, he answers it. Thank you, Gus, to bring their harvested animals. And finally, there was a question about does versus bucks. So I'll let you answer that when you go over the data here in a moment. And one final question about how somebody is partnered with a property once they are given permission to be a part of the hunting program. All right.
All righty.
Back over to you, Justin.
All right. Yeah. So once you have been with a property, then you as the kind of the liaison to that property, I then kind of will reach out with, hey, this is what I want to see done on the land. So like these are specific volunteer things that can be done on that property, and then that just again solidifies that kind of ownership of that land, because then you start thinking, well, this is almost kind of my backyard. And that's what we want the public to think, that these properties are open to everybody, not to hunt, but to kind of walk trails and explore. And we want you to think of that as kind of your own woods, to be able to kind of get those nature experiences. So then to do work on it and then to potentially hunt at is, giving people an opportunity that sometimes they wouldn't otherwise have. In terms of why we kill does and not bucks is because that's the deer that are reproducing. It only takes one buck to really kind of uptick to spread its genetics across several does. So,
but we don't. Someone just asked that, would they be able to take a buck? And so just maybe speaking to that as well.
Yeah. We tell hunters we want to see at least one doe killed, if not two, if you can, and then one doe for every buck. So we do allow bucks to be killed. We just really prefer those does first. And these all of these hunters pictured here were able to kill several does. So. Speaking of that, let's look at our data across our entire hunting career as niches. So as we can see here, like 2010, and this was the year that we only hunted at Weiler-Leopold, and that was 20 total deer just off the one property, which is pretty crazy. And then as we continue on throughout the years from 2011 all the way up until this year, we've added more and more property, and more square miles that we are hunting. So that's why you see larger increases in the amount of deer killed. But as you can see, again, down here towards the bottom, there are deer per square mile. That's our metric that we use to figure out how many deer we're wanting to kill. And those are all well above the 20 deer per square mile that we want to see. So we don't see hunting going away anytime soon on any of our properties. And as we continue to protect and preserve these lands, these metrics are going to be kind of really instrumental on how our hunting program evolves throughout our foreseeable future. So actually with that, I was approached by a grad student with Purdue that is wanting to become more involved in the hunting program, and he actually ran one out east. And this being my first year doing the hunting program, I was definitely excited and wanted to hear what he could bring to what we do as an organization. And they actually took a lot more data collection than our metrics. Again, we just asked hunters how many does were killed, how many button bucks, and how many antlered deer were killed. Whereas their program, they did trail camera traps, or where they looked at trail camera pictures throughout the year. They took observations from hunters. They asked hunters how many hours they hunted and what they saw for each hunt. And I think there's some really cool potential data that we can get from that. And I really don't see hunters kind of thinking that would be too much of a hindrance. And my goal then is to kind of probably start implementing that on a couple of our preserves and just see what data we're getting. But the data that we could get, I guess, that Patrick, who was the grad student that was talking to me about this, would be like a buck to doe ratio. We would actually get a better herd size estimate. And then we'd also, learn other animal observations that are on the field. I know sometimes hunters will share with us when they see something really cool like bobcats, but some of those other kind of rare species that are out there don't really get relayed to me. They either get forgot about or just kind of not brought up. So kind of having all of those data collection efforts and then also these rare animal species highlighted to us would be just really cool for us and our organization to share to the public, for you, and then also to, for other researchers that are looking to get better metrics and do a little more scientific studies. But I think this is kind of a really cool way that I see our hunting program moving forward in the future, is just more data collection to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it even further, and to really kind of bring us into the next step forward. So, does anybody have any questions before I get off of this sheet? So this is our main data tracking sheet that we've put together over the course of 10 years.
So we've had some other questions pop up, maybe not in reference to your data sheet, but
my next thing is just questions. So
sure. Okay. So one of the people asked that if they were put in charge as a lead, would they be able to recruit with just an approved list by us, or how does that process work if somebody were given the lead role?
So usually I would like to just kind of find somebody to be that point person, and then they find people that they think will fit into that role. So I don't, usually most point people are the only people that I'm looking for, and then they then can select how many or who they want to hunt on the property. But for the most part, most of the hunters, I guess within this year, since I've been the main program director of it, we've only had smaller properties where I've only had to put 1 or 2 hunters on the property. So as we do get those larger properties, I see myself maybe finding 1 point person and then recruiting those other people. But again, it's all very specific for the property and kind of what the property needs or who's involved with the organization. Any other questions from people? This presentation was sponsored by our here. We want to definitely give them a shout out and thank them for giving us this opportunity to engage all of you.
So someone did ask the question, is there any hunting other than deer hunting?
We do pheasant hunting, and that program is the Apple program through the Indiana DNR. Essentially, that is more of a, I believe, a lottery system. Gus, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And the DNR essentially pays NICHES for the rights to do that hunting program, and that's only in the month of November, and it's only pheasant hunting on one of our properties, Fisher Oak, Savannah. Other than that, we just do deer hunting.
That is correct.
Thanks for chiming in, Gus.
Now, moving forward, because I have been asked that also by other people, is if we will be doing any turkey hunting or squirrel hunting, small game hunting. I don't see that being within our docket on such a large scale thing. I know we've had discussions about programs through the DNR where they do pay us for like youth turkey hunting and getting people more involved within hunting. And I think that could be an option, but the main thing why we do our deer hunting is for the deer reduction, and because they are such keystone species that are affecting our plant communities. We haven't seen that with these other species that are commonly hunted, like turkey, rabbit, squirrel. But if that ever does become a thing, where their populations are way out of check, then that might be an option. Just however, right now the science is not showing that.
So we did have a question about the timeline for hunter meetings. It looks like Rod has chimed in with an answer. But basically, when do the hunter meetings start? And Rod indicated that a lot of those generally occur in October. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Justin.
So that's usually between the point people and the people that they hunt with. With so many properties across the board and with so many hunters we have, usually we don't have like one large scale meeting with everybody. Usually I'll reach out to Rod and say, hey, it's getting close to hunting season. Let's get hunter agreement forms, which is just a form that everybody has to fill out for liability. And they sign that and get that sent back to me. So Rod will direct his hunting crew to, get those forms back to me and then start the conversation of getting the property closed for hunting signs up and making the public aware that hunting season's about to occur. So if you have any questions, kind of bring those up then. But yeah, on a large scale thing, I would love to, maybe in future years have either a Zoom presentation or a talk with all of the hunters to get everybody engaged and kind of, that camaraderie between everybody would be something that would be pretty cool. And I think more of a connection between niches and the hunters.
Any other final questions for Justin, Rod, or possibly Gus, depending on what they are?
Yeah, when would we know if we get picked for a property or what property we would be in control of or lead of?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, that conversation would start occurring whenever we as an organization get new land that we want to hunt. I would usually, once we have that we've kind of come to the conclusion we want to hunt this property, I'll reach out to who I think would fit for that property's point person or other people that I would like to see being hunted. So that kind of just happens when acquisition happens of that land. There's no usual time scale. It just kind of depends on when we secure new land. And then I will reach out to those people. So that's why I really want to stress people volunteering, because then that's putting your name at the top of the list in my head of, okay, well, I really want to get this person on this property because they've been putting in this amount of work and volunteer hours, and they live relatively local. They're not driving across 13 counties to get to that land.
So Justin, just two things with that. When they're volunteering, one, it does a couple of things, right? Like you get to know the person too. It allows you to know, when he's thinking about what that good fit is. So letting the stewards get to know you is a good way to get on that list. And then Trent brought up, someone asked about opening niches properties to hunting, maybe speaking a little bit about how we determine which properties are hunted and which ones aren't.
Mm-hmm. So that, again, is very site specific. For example, we have Frog's Glory, which is a relatively large preserve and over along Tippecanoe River. I think we're up to over 100 acres. So you would, right off the top of your head, think that should be hunted. And there are a relatively large deer presence there. However, it's surrounded by a lot of neighbors, kind of in a subdivision area. So properly hunting that property without, those other kind of outside things that could occur. Just doesn't really make sense for us to hunt that when there is already probably people utilizing that property and pushing those deer out to where they're not over browsing in a certain area because people are walking the trails all the time. It's super site specific. When we do decide to hunt a property, most of our rural properties that don't have a lot of neighbors and don't have any restrictions on it, those are the ones that we typically do hunt. But our more urban areas, that's kind of getting into typically gray areas because we don't want to have any issues.
Any other final questions? I'm getting some thank yous.
Awesome.
So as a new volunteer, I mean, I guess obviously the best thing to do is get out there, show our face, put our name out there. But what other way could a new volunteer, a new member, as a NICHES member, how could we try to compromise for a new land as it opens up, or try to be at the top of the line as somebody that's never hunted any of your lands before?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's really the big stressor that it is we as such a commodity now within the state, because there's just not, as a hunter myself, I realize how hard it is nowadays to get hunting ground. It's a very difficult thing. So that's what we realize. We are giving such an opportunity to people, and there's so many people that do reach out to me asking to be a hunter. And that's what, we kind of expect people to put in some volunteer hours, because we realize that they're getting something out of it, and we should then get something out of it as well. Not only from the deer harvest, but also, some extra volunteer hours. I would just stress that volunteer. I mean, obviously.
And communicating that's one of the things they're interested in, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. Come into those volunteer days where introduce yourself, say that you want to become involved with the organization. These are your goals is a big thing. Monetary donations are always, or just
but it's not a deciding factor in being a part of the program. So I just want people to realize that.
That is actually something that we've had discussions early on within our hunting program, is whether or not we wanted to lease out any of our lands to hunters, and realized quickly that that's something that would benefit us as an organization. We want people that are volunteers that will take ownership and responsibility and volunteer with the organization, and that then we can have some say of what we want done on the land. As soon as you start leasing out properties, and those people are have contracted that they can kind of have certain rights.
It's a different relationship.
For sure.
All right. Well, we're coming up on the hour. So just wanted to one more time ask if there were any final questions for Justin or Rod. All right. I'm not seeing any. So I just want to again thank everyone for being here tonight and joining us for this presentation. And
Awesome.
Hope you'll join us for some of our other Zoom presentations that we'll be having in the future.
Thank you all so much.